The Mayo Experience.
Mayo Experience. Mayo Experience. Mayo Experience. Experience.
Welcome to the Pat Mayo Experience, digging into some more golf talk. People love golf talk. I love talking golf. I like talking golf. I like very much to talk into golf. But today, if you want to get into a draw for 100 DraftKings dollars, let's say, subscribe to the Pat Mayo Experience audio podcast, leave a 5-star review, DraftKings handle, and something you enjoy about this show, and boom, you're in the draw for 100 DraftKings dollars. Winners announced on Monday's show. If you want to be in a $20 draw for the video version, smash the like button for the episode. Leave your DraftKings handle in the comment section. You tell me who's going to win the Masters, okay? Or at least who you're betting for the Masters, and you'll be in a draw for 20 DK dollars. Winners also announced on Monday's show. Joining me, bit of a pivot off the normal type of guest that we have on, the associate editor of golfdigest.com. I call him Stephen Hennessey. In Francais, he would be Etienne Hennessey, but we'll just call him Stephen Hennessey. What's going on, my man?
Hey, nothing much, Pat. Appreciate you having me on. I'm obviously a huge fan of yours, and we're cohorts for the Golf Digest betting column, so it's nice to have a conversation like this. I'm pumped for it.
Yeah, well, it's probably a little bit different. Like, that's kind of the one thing I really wanted to hammer down on is like working for Golf Digest. At a point last year, you guys start getting into producing betting content, or at least a betting article. Now there's a betting and daily fantasy article. So when this first comes up, like, how does that work at Golf Digest? Because for ages, like, it's not a magazine or even a website that like gives out picks on things, and it's something like I notice on TV as well. Like, especially being in Canada, we have like, you know, on our ESPN, we have golf shows, but on the golf shows, no one ever like gives a pick or like breaks down a tournament. Or like, hey, this guy has a really good chance of winning this week because this course really suits him well. It's like, you know what's great? The wine near the course. Like, how does the leap go from like that part of everything and like skills and what to do in golf and like here's a great way to play this type of bunker shot into translating more over into picks and analysis and that kind of thing?
Right. Yeah. Well, with the legalization in the U.S. In 2018, I think we saw, pretty quickly where it was going to go from a content standpoint and what the desire would be for golf-specific betting content. So, at Golf Digest, we acted pretty quickly, I'd say, compared to other traditional media companies. So, we started that betting column that we talked about that you're a part of. And, we have a PGA Tour caddy, a part of it, giving their picks each week. So I think we thought, right away, we're lucky in that we have some young leadership at Golf Digest. So we kind of knew right away where this would be going. And we tried to look immediately and say, what's the immediate desire? What's, in a year, where do we want to be? In 3 to 5 years, where do we see this going? So I thought, I was the resident Jersey guy. We were based in Connecticut for years. Now we're at the One World Trade Center in downtown New York, but they look to me being the Jersey guy and they're like, where do you see this going? I was like, this would be cool, to kind of offer this, kind of robust betting picks each week from 7 industry leaders, one of whom is yourself. So that's kind of how it got going.
Yeah, and when people click on that article and they see my picks, they're like, this guy's a fucking joke. He is terrible. And they're not wrong. I'm not going to lie to you. But you say like the young leadership, and that's what I've really noticed is that a lot of traditional media outlets that have ended up, and I'm not saying like going from traditional media to we're only talking about gambling and picks. I mean, there's obviously a happy balance that you need to find between it, but the young leadership you talk about, they do seem more willing to take this on where like, how many like olds work at your office?
Well, I'm basically like in the middle now at Golf Digest. And when I started, so I'm 31, and when I started in 2011, so this is my 9th year, I'm getting pretty old. I was the youngest one for like 5 years. There was one other colleague who was hired after me, but I was the youngest one for 5 years. So there are a lot of olds, a lot of boomers in the office, but now I'm like very middle-aged. We have a company golf tournament every year, and it's cut off by, olds versus the millennials. And I was like barely a millennial this year. So I think that kind of says where we're going as a company. We're becoming way more digitally focused than we have been for the last, 3 to 4 years. So that's definitely helped with a lot of things, and specifically in the betting realm.
So how do even let's say people in their 40s, 40 and up, 45 and up, how do they feel about when you write about golf and you're doing stories about golf that betting is now a part of that? That's a part of like the analysis that comes along with it. Do they feel resistance to it or do they get it as well?
No, they definitely get it. They see, the potential positives, revenue wise, and where this could go, and things that you and I have talked about before, and you've talked about so much on your show of, integrating the betting odds into a telecast. Us as a content, media rights company, we kind of see where this could potentially go, and we want to be at the forefront of it. And we're kind of in a unique position too, now with our partnership with the PGA Tour. For those who don't know, Discovery Communications acquired Golf Digest last May. So Golf TV, which owns all the international TV rights to the PGA Tour, is also under that Discovery umbrella. So we're kind of in that same media company that owns all the international PGA Tour rights TV wise. So, we want to be kind of thought leaders in this area because we know, in 2 to 3 years from now, you and I would love to see where, there's a TV feed with betting odds, and there's, folks like yourself who are kind of breaking it down from broadcast standpoint, all the things you've talked about before in your show. I think most people at Golf Digest have gotten that. And I would say it's interesting because when I started, I would have never have thought I would be like the leader of all of our gambling content, or even that we had this like robust gambling content plan. And we have three of us who are kind of doing sports betting analysis, and we have a podcast now that we started. So it's definitely exciting times and cool to see how it's evolved.
So I actually didn't know when I heard like Discovery bought Golf TV. I thought that was like Discovery Channel. And I was like, that seems really
Well,
weird
it
to me.
is.
Well,
Yeah.
so it's all the same stuff.
Yeah, all those, HGTV, all, Animal Planet, all those channels. So Golf TV is essentially under that same umbrella as Discovery Channel.
Yeah, like I know because I'm up in Canada that instead of going to the PGA Tour website to watch like PGA Tour Live or PGA Tour Live, it's never been clear to me which one it is. Do you live under par or do you live, or is it live under par? I don't know.
It's just a mindset, Pat.
I guess so. It's however you're feeling that day. But I have to go to Golf TV in order to watch the same round. So does that mean that the PGA for their live under par and their featured groups is out there filming and doing commentary, and then it's just being repurposed for Golf TV internationally because it's like the same feed?
Yeah, there's, it's that feed is kind of transmitted to Golf TV, and then Golf TV transmits that internationally. So for some events, there's like a different broadcast crew. For the President's Cup, we had our own. The Zozo, I think the same, and the Skins game was our event. We kind of put that on in conjunction with the PGA Tour, so we kind of owned that from a broadcast standpoint. So yeah, for now it's kind of the same broadcast. It's just kind of how it's transmitted internationally.
Well, that's really interesting to me. I really didn't want to get into broadcasting talk, and depending on when people listen to this, because this is going to be a fairly evergreen type show that people can go back to, listen to 6 months from now, see how much our opinions have changed on some of the stuff, see where the industry's at. But I've really been hammering down on the broadcast stuff, and people know that about me, like past 3, 4, 5 years, until I get my Green Zone Golf shot by shot fantasy channel or gambling channel. I'm going to keep hammering down on all of this. But it'd be really interesting if Golf TV at some of these events, like you said, if they're going to do their own broadcast for the President's Cup or the Zozo at events where they can do that, or even take in a feed from PGA Tour Live and put different broadcasters on it, that could be a real potential way to do a lot about what we're talking about broadcast wise, that all of a sudden there's this international feed that isn't accessible to the people in the US. Almost like, I know for ages, like I would watch the CBS broadcast on Sunday, but if I could go online and find a feed of Sky Sports, I much preferred to watch it on Sky Sports. And then eventually it did seem like there was a little bit of influence that carried over to the US broadcasting once the PGA Tour and these broadcasters saw that, internationally they were doing a much better job, that if Golf TV jumped on that, incorporated some of the things that we were talking about, if they were able to do that, it might actually push the PGA Tour and that product forward, and then there would be a trickle up effect to some of the more major broadcasts. At least hopefully. That would be my game plan if anyone was to do that. So I find that really intriguing that there's a wedge there where cool stuff can really be done.
Yeah, I think you and I are on the same page there. And if it were up to us, there would be that, green zone, cut sweat show that you and Feinberg have perfected over the years. I would just put you guys on it and let you run with it. But
yeah, well, you know who wouldn't like that? The PGA Tour.
you say that, but
it would just be like, fuck, he missed.
Right.
That'd be the entire show.
Highly entertaining, though. I mean, I think they could even see that. But I think the tour, give them credit for seeing where this is going. I think, you reading some of the tea leaves of where this is going in terms of betting specifically with their rights deal with IMG Arena, which is a data company based in Europe that they had a deal with starting, I think, at the end of last year. But it'll be interesting to see what that looks like. I mean, I've seen some testing of that product. So it could be something where, again, this is something you've talked about a lot, but it's a par 3 hole. There's odds of, a particular group and a player to hit the green to make a birdie, a 3-way match bet between 3 guys. And, what that allows the tour to do is use their ShotLink data, which is now synced with the IMG Arena deal. And now all of a sudden you have specific odds for that hole. So if it's, the Sanderson Farms 13th hole to par 3 and Jason Kokrak's in the same group with Sam Ryder and Chesson Hadley, just to pick random guys, then all of a sudden you have specific odds for those guys based on their past performance on par 3 scoring, strokes gained. It would make a lot of sense. So I think that's kind of where it's going. And it's where we've seen this going for a couple of years, but that's why it's so exciting to kind of hear the tour being proactive in these ways and seeing that a product like that isn't too far away.
Now, is it just the bubble that I live in the Twitter world, in the online world of like gambling, golf, and daily fantasy golf? Are we just too mad about all of this stuff all the time that it makes us seem petulant? Like, because you're sort of a hybrid between both worlds, I feel like, at least, and that we want it now, and it's not that we do want it now. I don't want it to. I mean, I would love for it to come out next week, but it feels like if we don't consistently complain about it, that they're just going to be complacent about it. And I know that the players, they're developing an app that's coming out. But for WGC Mexico, as a part of this, they revamped their app, and I downloaded the new app. I was like, all right, and it's like it's terrible. It made it worse. So, like, is anyone there like product testing it? Like, shouldn't that be someone's job?
That's an interesting question. I don't know enough about the app development of the tour's scoreboard specifically, but I have seen all the feedback on Twitter, and it's been interesting, and I don't disagree with everybody. But I think part of that frustration, from folks like yourself and everyone in the golf Twitter, gambling Twitter specifically, is that you kind of know that you're right, that there should be this feed, to cater to the DFS and betting community, because there's obviously an appetite for it. DraftKings data says that golf is the 3rd or 4th most popular sport on their platform, depending on what time of year it is. And, that kind of tells you all that you need to know about the level of interest in that DFS betting world. And, with the tour's relationship now with DraftKings, I think things are happening that in a year from now, we're going to be in a different place. And I think, folks like yourself are going to say, man, they actually were listening to all my complaining for the last 4 to 5 years. And, I hope the end result of that is the Pat Mayo, cut sweat show on PGA Tour Live. That would be awesome.
Yeah, I mean, I'm not going to stop complaining until they write me a big check to do work for them. So that's just that's going to be like my agency in all of this. I'm going to keep complaining until I get paid, then I'll shut up.
Right. And why not, if you continue to get paid for, the good stuff you're doing? It makes all the sense. But I think, like I said, if you read what the tour is doing, and think of it from the tourist perspective too, which people probably don't want to always do, but they have a product to protect themselves. Integrity of the game is so important, especially in golf. So you have to make sure that's not compromised at all. And the tour has done that since PASPA came out in May 2018. Is they've been proactive in making the steps that they see necessary to kind of see a product like we're talking about come to fruition. So they've gotten on the same page as the tour players. And there's a lot of regulations that they have to abide by. So not to get so, governmental about it and, speaking like I'm Big Brother, but that's kind of what, from the tourist perspective, they have a, huge $1 billion business to protect. So if they could do the things that you've been talking about for years, I think they want to do that. And if you read, the IMG Arena deal, the DraftKings deal, the players, showing every shot that they're going to do this year, it would be pretty cool if they could do that going forward. And if they could figure out a way, they're going to do that.
I'm really worried about this showing every shot at the players because I'm
Worried.
excited for it, but the PGA, at least in terms of their actual like technical development, I'm talking about like the app side of things,
Mhm.
has been way behind. And like the Masters set a precedent last year. The Masters app was excellent. They showed every shot almost, not in real time, but if I wanted to see if Emiliano Grillo, when the website was wrong and said that he bogeyed number 17, then all of a sudden it got switched to a 4. I knew that because I went on the Masters app and looked at the shots. I was like, oh, I can see the video of this. This is perfect. I just worry that there was a lot of pressure put on them to catch up to that point, at least for one event, and that's what they're doing at the Players. And it makes the most logical sense to do it at the Players. It's the home base of the PGA Tour. They'll have the most hands on deck in case something goes wrong. They'll have the most cameramen, everything. They can set up TPC Sawgrass the way that they want in terms of cameras. And that's the overlooked part for a lot of this stuff, especially if you have something like the Northern Trust, for example, where it's played on a rotation of courses. Now, they are similar courses, but if you go from Paramus one year to Boston one year to Chicago one year or whatever, it would be difficult to know where to put the cameras the first time around. There would be trial and error with that. So at least for TPC Sawgrass, they know the grounds, they know where they can put the cameras, everything like that. But if they felt forced to do this and the product is completely unsuccessful, the app doesn't work, the technology is not there, it's not enough, not necessarily real time, but we see all the shots, but it doesn't come out till 5 hours after the round is done. That if it is a disaster, I could see them not necessarily scrapping it, but it's a huge step backwards.
Yeah, I mean, you're right. They would probably delay it until they could figure everything out and make sure it's the product they want to deliver. But I would say that I know they have been testing this for the past couple months. So I would think, and to your point, TPC Sawgrass is right in their backyard. It's a course that always hosts the players, so they know where they could put all the cameras and make sure it's successful. And I don't think it's something that they saw at last year's Masters and they said, "Oh, we should do this." I think that was probably in the works for a couple of years. So I would be a little more optimistic about it being a success this year. I think it will be.
Anything that we talked about, like if there's going to be resistance or not for some of the older generation as it pertains to Golf Digest. How do these betting and DFS articles do compared to I'm not talking about not necessarily clickbait articles, but like story of the day, Paulina Gretzky picks. Like that's going to do well. When I used to work at SEO, when I used to work as like an SEO specialist at a website, like I know what rates in terms of getting clicks, but in terms of like the general articles, the long form stories, or like even if I look at Golf Digest today, there's a article about the senior tour. Like, do those articles do well? I can't imagine that they do.
Now you're talking really nitty gritty in my world. I oversee all the equipment instruction and golf course content for golfdigest.com too. But no, the betting stuff performs very well. I think I saw a stat last week. I think the weekly betting column that you contribute to does 22% better than your average story on our website. So, there's obviously an appetite there. It's only going to get more that, the more states pass legalization of sports betting. And I think there's more that we want to do too, from a content standpoint. So I think it's just the start of what we want to be doing in this space. And it's cool to have everyone kind of embrace that. I mean, it's even, just conversation in the office. 4 or 5 years ago, I would have been a little scared to talk, betting on the Honda Classic amongst my coworkers. But, now everyone's, almost my age, it's way younger. It's legal to talk betting now. And, we're yelling at the TV on Thursday of, Chapultepec because Ben on four putted and everyone in the office is laughing. Whereas before, I might have gotten fired my first year at Golf Digest. So it's fun to see.
Well, that's the thing. That's the thing that I've really noticed from like old style traditional golf media to new is that there's an investment from the people doing, whether it be me or Feinberg, the tour junkies, Wiley, Gup. I don't want to leave anyone out. Kenny and Tambo. Everyone does really good work, but there's a personal investment in that, and it seems to make people pay attention a whole lot harder. Like when they talk about growing the game and growing the tour, the reason that I think that something like the Green Zone or even having Shot Tracker at every single course, and you had mentioned Sanderson Farms, is if you can get people into gambling or daily fantasy on DraftKings and get them to play a lineup, really understand how it works, and then they have the incentive to follow these people around at the Sanderson Farms, you don't need to rely on CBS or NBC to make some of these guys into stars. Like, there's no reason for me to know 200 players on the PGA Tour, a handful of guys on the Corn Ferry Tour, people on the Sunshine Tour, the European Tour, but I bet on this stuff. Like, I want to become knowledgeable about it, and then I follow it. Like, daily fantasy / gamblers versus traditional golf media people. Who do you think knows Adam Schenk better?
Exactly. It's the DFS and gambler guy because, you have a personal investment in Adam Schenk's performance, whereas, normal golf fan and country club guy, has no investment in Adam Schenk and maybe has heard his name, but beyond that doesn't really care about him. And I think that's obviously what the tour has seen in terms of engagement with their product is how successful since they've embraced, the DraftKings relationship and betting wise, what that's done for engagement in their product. And they've seen the early successes of that. So that's why you're just going to see that continue to grow. Especially I could speak to Golf Digest specifically, but I think among other traditional outlets as well.
So I don't play nearly as much golf as I used to, especially over the last 10 years. Growing up, I played a ton of golf. I'm from a part of the country where not a lot of golf can be played year-round. In fact, it cannot be. So we get like a good 7 months in. More so now. Global warming, top-notch stuff. But
Good for golf.
What's that?
Good for golfers at global.
Yeah. Good for golfers who live in generally cold climates. You can start in like March and squeeze it until maybe early November now if everything breaks right for you and there's not a whole bunch of snow. Either way, but I would play like 50, 60 rounds a year, junior membership, just go out all day, play 36 holes, try to play more. Basically get dropped off in the morning and stay until it got dark out. And I know there's a lot of people that I grew up that were like that. I end up moving. I live in Manhattan for a bit. I live in Jersey for a bit. I live in Toronto. Not the most accessible golf courses in the world, and the ones that are a bit out of my league in terms of finances. So I don't really care about like equipment stuff and things like that. How does that do as it pertains to the digital side of Golf Digest? Because I'm always really curious, because Golf Digest to me is something that I would see in the doctor's office, and I would go in or a dentist's office, or people would be reading it on a plane, that kind of thing. But digital wise, I would still think that the people who are the most concerned about the equipment are still the people that buy the hard copy of the magazine.
Yeah. So, we're still the number one printed magazine at, I think, 1.6 million subscribers. So, number one over Golf Magazine by a little bit. But what we're most excited about is that we're number one amongst all golf websites. Last year, we surpassed even the PGA Tour.com, which is big because they have the leaderboard that everyone checks all the time. So, and funny enough, equipment is usually number one for us at the end of every year, because search wise, if you think about it, people are searching, best drivers, best irons, etc. And our hot list is kind of like the Bible for buying new golf equipment. So that ranks, you're talking SEO before, that's my world. That's, number one, it ranks high for us. In addition to the PGA Tour WAGs, so the Paulina Gretzky, the Dowd Simpsons of the world, that does well for us too. But The hot list is number one. And obviously instruction content, that's the bread and butter of Golf Digest. It's always what to play. So equipment, where to play, golf courses, and how to play. So, that's always going to be the staple of Golf Digest. And, now mix in a little golf betting too. And it's kind of like a fourth pillar in my world.
Yeah, so you have the golf betting that goes along with this because I think that's the real key to expanding all of the interest in betting and gambling is how do you take those people and not necessarily make them into bettors? Because I mean, that would be the ultimate end goal. But it's not like, oh, I like to buy this new wedge because I read about it on Golf Digest. Oh, I also read this column about betting. I'm going to go put $100 on Justin Thomas to go win. It's sort of like the South Park underpants gnomes that, you have the underpants, you have the question mark, and then you have the profit. What is this middle part that we get to have that translation between the people who would never bet on something and converting them into gamblers or DraftKings players? Is it instructional on how to bet? Is it this is what this means when you see like minus 120 in front of something? Because that's strangely one of the biggest things that I found. I found this more from the football world because at least golf odds are very logical. It's like, oh, he's plus 2,800. What does that mean? So it means he's 28 to 1. If you put $100 on him to win, you would get $2,800 back. 10, 280, it makes a lot of sense. When you start putting the minuses and pluses with weird numbers, like what does minus 400 mean? Now, it means if you put down 400 on something, you would win $100. That means that person was a heavy favorite. But I find that most of the people who aren't like enamored in the world of betting just really don't understand that part of it.
Yes, and that's kind of where Golf Digest sees itself in this landscape is we've always been kind of like the Bible for the golfer. So we see ourselves as educating just the normal golfer of what all this means. So, you're talking to your audience about, the Honda Classic and, you're dropping each way and you're dropping, parlay and top 10 and the normal golfer, if they listen to that and they're uneducated, you might be talking over some of their heads, but where we see ourselves is, okay, let's explain what an each way is. And I think part of it is on the sports book operators, the DraftKings, the FanDuels, William Hill, everybody, BetMGM. It's marketing it a little bit so it appeals to the golfer a little more so. And it's something you've talked about before too with other sports. People betting on the Super Bowl. How do you then convert them to sports bettors? Not just with their box pools at the Super Bowl. So the golf equivalent would be people doing a Masters pool. How do we get them to just pay attention to the betting space and just have a little knowledge about it, for the entire PGA Tour season? So I think that's where we see ourselves coming in is educating the golfer. And, you do a good job of it. Action Network has done a good job of it, being in the field a little bit. So I think it's kind of, and I think you'll start to see sports books start to give away offers. So, it might be a simple offer that, my uncle would be able to understand because he's never bet before. But, if this guy wins, I would get, 8 times my money. But if he also finishes in the top 10, I get X amount of free bets. Like I could actually understand that. And that would incentivize me to start betting on a normal basis. It's not something that's so foreign to me. So I think that's where we need to get to in the industry, continue to educate people about what all this means.
Yeah, there's also a market too for non-traditional tie-ins to the gambling space. Like you mentioned, either offers or promo codes or specials. Like the one thing that a lot of these gambling books are doing right now is customer acquisition. How do we get the biggest piece of this pie? Because generally speaking, that if you become if you're like me and you have money on like 8 different gambling sites, I'm more the outlier there than I think the average person would end up being. They would probably have their site and that's where they go. If it's the first one they sign up for, they'll probably end up staying with them. So if you're someone like TaylorMade or Callaway, and then you see that Golf Digest has this into the gambling road, like you're being a bridge to a lot of these equipment players, like why wouldn't someone like the big golf providers team up with DraftKings and be like, hey, if you buy this TaylorMade driver and you punch in code TaylorMade at DraftKings Sportsbook, you get like a free $300 bet or something.
Right. No, totally. I think you're going to start to see traditional golf companies like the equipment manufacturers do that. I think there's been a couple giveaways that we've done, that other places have done, that you enter this contest and you get a free driver if you win. So there's low risk for that, and anyone can understand that. Oh, I win a free $500 driver. Why wouldn't I try that? I'll pick a random golfer and he might win. How cool. So yeah, I think you make a great point in customer acquisition. I think people want to, email addresses is huge. Getting information on people that you could then sell is kind of where the digital media world is going. So I think you're hitting on a lot of interesting things there.
The next thing up is what happens when Tiger is done?
Oh, come on. Why would you bring such a thing up like that? We're
Well,
having a nice conversation when Tiger is done. Come on.
Yeah, well, I mean, eventually we're going to run out of time on Tiger. He's what, 45 now?
But he looks, I mean, he's looked so good, maybe besides Riviera, but he looks like the old Tiger. He ain't done anytime soon.
No, I agree. I'm not even talking about like this year or next year. Like, let's say when he's in the stage of his career where Phil is right now. And he's 49, he's 50, maybe twice a year, Tiger can spike somewhere and look really good. But most of the time, like, he's not going to be very good because he's an old man. That tends to be what happens, even with the most elite and best golfers of all time. As it pertains to trying to build up stars, it seems like the networks decided that Ricky and Jordan Spieth were going to be the next wave of big stars, which is really weird because Rory was the best one of all of them. Mm-hmm. And currently, like, Brooks has been the most successful of everyone, but those guys don't get the pub like Ricky and Jordan Spieth do. Maybe it's like the best marketing decision Ricky Fowler ever made was like wear orange all the time. Good thing he went to Oklahoma State. It just kind of translated naturally, but he pops off the screen. Kids really like Ricky Fowler. And Spieth seemed to be perfect. Homegrown, American guy, super nice, winning majors, and it turns out that maybe he's not the best. So how do you actually grow this next wave? Because I was talking about the broadcast, like they should be periodically, they should make their own identifications of these players and show them, like when they cut away to Tiger when he's 25 over par, maybe they should be cutting to Rahm or Cantlay or Bryson or whoever it is. Who do you think the actual best guys to like build around would be if you're thinking about the longevity of what happens after Tiger?
Yeah, interesting. I think, first of all, I think the tour is in such a good place, just interest wise, that, even if Tiger decided tomorrow that he's going to retire from professional golf, God forbid, I think the level of interest is so high. And we saw that even when Tiger, had those couple down years, with his surgery and all, and wasn't really playing. I think the level of interest, just PGA Tour wise, was so great. So from a golf perspective, Tiger, and I'm talking like recreational golf, I think Tiger does so much to move the needle. Golf courses see that, equipment manufacturers see that. There's just such a level of interest that goes up when Tiger Woods is playing. So, I think that's where that effect would be felt the most. And, everyone says there's never going to be another Tiger Woods. Is probably right, because, when he came onto the scene, he was just so different of a level of superstar in sports and transcended everything for, 20 plus years. And still is. I mean, the Masters was Golf Digest's, biggest traffic day, in so long. And, he's so good for business when Tiger Woods is around. But, back to your original point, Ricky and Spieth are kind of struggling a little bit. I don't necessarily know that broadcasts, shine a special light on them anymore, I think.
Oh, yes. Listen, there's no reason for CBS at Riviera to be showing Jordan Spieth 4 over par, making approach shots onto the 17th when he's in a tie for 57th.
Fair, but I think there's a level of intrigue now because he is struggling. So people want to see like what is wrong with him, and why isn't he playing well? Maybe they should have not showed his chip shot when he's 4 over par and showed Harold Varner's tee shot on the 10th hole. And I think we could both agree there. But
it's not even like a Harold Varner problem, because I get why they don't show Harold Varner as much, although they were showing him everywhere at the very beginning when he got off to the hot start. Then he just fell off the face of the earth and they stopped showing him completely. But it's the bigger names that I'm concerned about. Like, if you want to build up new stars, you have to make an argument to the audience that these are people worth watching. And it feels like they don't do that to any of the new stars. Like Morikawa, for example. Morikawa's really good. He's American. He's really young, and he's had a lot of success on the PGA Tour so far in his young career. By cutting away to him, even when he was making a run at Riviera, they didn't cut away to him. And then, he ended up like 5-putting and taking himself out of it. But like, why aren't we periodically checking in with him? Like, why wouldn't you want to get like at least make your audience familiar with a 22-year-old American player who could be the number 1 player in the world at some point?
Yeah, I think that's, a fair point. And I think to connect people with the new stars of the game, Colin Morikawa, Victor Hovland, Matthew Wolff, you kind of have to show their personality a little bit. And I think it's on the player too to kind of reveal a little personality. I think Spieth and Ricky did a really good job of letting people in, and people believing like they could understand who they were. And I think that's why they kind of grew their following. I think Rory has done a good job of that. I think he's in a position now. He's world number 1. I think he's a very likable guy. Always, good with the media. The golf Twitter people love when Rory talks. Anything he says, they eat up. I think, an interesting thing too is the whole Koepka Bryson thing, and the villain, making someone a villain within golf. You have Patrick Reed, with the whole bunker situation at the Hero. I mean, when Peter Kostis came out and said something last week about Patrick Reed, I mean, that was like everyone clicked on that article and listened to the No Laying Up podcast. So I think like once you kind of have some like real conversation around these pros, that's when people feel like they're connected. So, it's on, golf media folks like, Golf Digest and other, CBS, NBC to tell the story of Colin Morikawa and tell the normal golfer, why should we care about Colin Morikawa? Who is this guy? Give us a little story behind his life. But it's also, these guys are storytellers now too with social media. It's so easy to get their story across that, they could maybe be doing a better job to market themselves. So, we could kind of feel like we get to know them as well.
Yeah, and I think that we need to, like, Ian Poulter is a really good divisive figure in the world of golf. Like, he's not a bad guy whatsoever, but Americans hate him because of the Ryder Cup. I think that's a great angle to play. Like, I love Patrick Reed. I love that he like cheats. I think that's hilarious, and that people get really triggered about it. I think that's great and people argue the exact opposite. That is the worst thing that could potentially happen to the PGA Tour. These are generally like golf purists, and I'm not, so I don't really give a shit. I just think it's fun to watch. It's fun to watch these storylines. When Brooks is an asshole to people, I think it's funny. I think it's good for the game, at least amongst people like me who to tune in to watch and pay attention to something other than who I've bet on this week. Like, that's a story I will go click on. And I know that I'm probably on the wrong end of that in terms of the majority who would do something to that effect.
But I would say, like, even to that, Patrick Reed, you like him, you're going to tune in when he's playing just in case he does something like that. And you want to see what he's going to do next. I think even if you're a golf purist and you can't stand him, hurting the game like that, you're also going to tune in even if you don't like it, because, you want to see, you might be mad about what he does, but you want to be part of the conversation that when he does something bad, then, you're kind of knowledgeable about it.
But it also relies on these guys being good as well. Like, if Patrick Reed sucked, no one would care.
No one would care, right?
But like, if he's constantly in the mix for Ryder Cups, or I mean, he's a Masters champion. If he get back in the mix at the Masters, how incredible would that be this year? That if it came down to it, it's like Rory's going for the Grand Slam, Reed is one back, Brooks is in it, and Tiger's in it. Like, if we had to kind of figure out the Masters, if you could program right now the final 3 groups of the Masters to achieve the highest television ratings, who would be in those 3 groups?
Man, I love that question. Obviously Tiger, obviously Phil, Rory going for the Grand Slam, Brooks.
Wait, does Brooks move the needle enough for people, do you think? Because I don't know if he does or not.
Yeah, I don't think he does either. You're right. But I think if he was in a group with like Bryson and Patrick Reed, then that's a different story, because, now he's partly a villain. Because I think at Bethpage, when he ran away with it at the PGA, I don't know how exciting that was. And the New York fans got in his ear and were screaming at him. And that, I think that pissed a lot of golf purists off too. But I think from a, just general interest, I think you're right. He's not quite at that level, because I don't know if he has done a great job of letting people in. I think, he's more active on Instagram, over the last year, the whole body issue, which was its own thing, and Jenna Sims. I mean, he's somewhat of an intriguing character. I think obviously not on the level of a Tiger or a Phil, but I think he's won 4 majors in a 2+ year span. So to have him going for another major with Rory, and him and Bryson obviously have their little feud, which I think I'm with you and Feinberg. I think they kind of play off of that just because they know that gets people talking. I don't know how much they actually despise each other, but it gets everyone talking about it.
So we would have Tiger and Phil playing together with the lead on Sunday is the optimal scenario here, which is not great because you have one guy who's 45 and one guy who's 50. So
Sure.
that's kind of where we're leaning here, but that everyone would tune into that. Like that would be fantastic. Rory, Ricky, Spieth, someone else.
Yeah.
Maybe it is Brooks. Maybe it's Bryson.
Yeah, I mean,
maybe
one of those guys, Patrick Reed. I think
maybe it probably is Patrick Reed.
Yeah, being a past champion and how divisive a character he is. I mean, Twitter would explode if he's in the mix at the Masters this year. I think so.
Which is weird because that leaves off someone like Dustin Johnson, who's basically been the best player on earth for 5 years, and no one cares about him. It's weird.
Yeah, I think he's like generally likable by most of the golf public, but he's kind of in that Brooks category that they're so talented and they have won a lot. DJ hasn't won majors like Brooks has, but there's just not the personality that has allowed us to connect with him, and that's not these guys' fault. Like, their job is to go out and win golf tournaments and win money and have a fun life, and those two guys have done a great job of that. So I don't want to blame them, and that's not what I'm saying. I'm just saying that people haven't necessarily connected with them the way that we've connected with other stars in other sports, maybe.
Yeah, and it would be better too that in that mix, even if it was like in the final 5 pairings kind of thing. Like, I feel like Patrick Cantlay got a really good bump by making that run on Sunday last year, that he just became like, oh, this guy's really good. Xander was very much the same way. Like, Xander had the top 10s at the US Open. He had played well in majors, but there's a big discrepancy amongst the public between what happens at the Masters and what happens at the rest of the majors. Is that fair?
Yeah, that's true. I mean, I would say that golf, explodes during the Masters and explodes during the other majors, but especially the Masters. I think because the casual sports fan might not really pay attention to the PGA or the Open Championship, but they're definitely watching the Masters if there's intrigue, and if Tiger's in a duel with some of the best players in the world down the stretch, then people are talking about it and they're tuning in. I mean, last year's Masters was so good, and even take Tiger out of the equation, you had such a duel with Molinari and Koepka and Cantlay and Webb Simpson. It was, I think we take for granted how exciting it was down the stretch. And then you had Tiger Woods, going for another green jacket. It was so good. If we could have something even close to that level, it'll be a successful Masters this year.
And you forget that people love a good meltdown, and Molinari melted down. His career has been like off the rails ever since that
Now he's
Masters
150 to 1 to win at Riviera. It's crazy.
Yeah. So there's 2 guys, I think in particular, that the PGA Tour should really be trying to build up, because I think they're going to be really good for a really long time, and they're really young. You mentioned sort of that new wave of guys, the Morikawas, Wolfs, Sung Jae Im, Victor Hovland, all great players. People are kind of aware that Justin Thomas and Xander Schauffele are really good players as well. But there's 2 that I think that are just going to be stars, and it's Rahm and it's Bryson. And you can build, and like, they have real personalities too. Like, Bryson's kind of a dweeb, but he's getting yoked at the gym just so he can hit it farther. And Rahm just has like, Rahm is so good, and people give him so much shit all the time for like not winning, despite the fact that he wins all the time. And he just like loses his mind all the time. Like, he's great TV.
Yeah, totally. I think Rahm, the golf purists probably don't like Rahm, cursing under his breath and throwing his putter at his bag, but
that's great though. That's great. Then make him the European everyone hates.
Yes. Yeah. I mean, he could be, and I think he's on his way to being the next Seve, that next great Ryder Cup player. That personality, he's a little divisive, kind of like Ian Poulter, but on a different planet than Ian Poulter. No offense to Poulter, but Rahm has the potential, I think you're right, to be that next great star. And we didn't mention Justin Thomas before. I think he's kind of separating himself, to be on that Koepka, Rory, upper echelon.
But the thing is, like, it's not surprising that Thomas and Spieth are pals, because, like, what if you had to describe Justin Thomas, like, personality wise, how could you even do that? Like, his only real attribute, a lot like Spieth, was that he won a lot, and that's always going to take precedence, because you'll be on TV, people will see you in the final group, but there's nothing interesting about Justin Thomas.
Yeah, I think to the normal sports fan, you're probably right. I think, if you listen to his interviews, if you read his stuff, if you listen to No Laying Up's interviews with him, I think he's a very thoughtful guy. I think he's pretty respectful to everybody, and he wins a lot. He's very talented. Maybe he's not the personality that connects people, but again, like we were saying, it's not his fault necessarily. He's just not.
No, it's also like his actual composure is probably what makes him really good. But in terms of trying to sell like a new wave of players, that's why I think that Rahm and Bryson are really the two. Like, they're both good, not as good as Justin Thomas, but maybe they can get to that level. But the big thing is too, like, Justin Thomas is 26, he's super young. I think that people believe that John Rahm is like 37 years old. He's 25.
Right. Yeah, because he, was on the scene while he was still at ASU, and was finishing top 5 at the Waste Management. So he's been out there for 5 years. But no, you're right. I think this could be a big year for Rahm. He was my pick to win the Masters. I still think he could do that. He hits that high ball flight. His short game isn't on the level of others. Maybe his scrambling stats aren't elite yet, but I think just the way he hits the ball, he should do well at Augusta. So I'm with you. I would love to see Rahm be that next star and kind of separate himself.
Yeah, back-to-back top 10s at Augusta the past 2 seasons for John Rahm. And I think that he has improved his short game, but here's the sneaky thing about your around the green play. If you just hit every green, it doesn't matter.
Yeah, very good point.
That's the key. That's the Keegan Bradley approach to things. Or when Corey Connors won, that was the big approach. Like, the guy loses 20 strokes around the greens every week. But hey, if you hit 71 out of 72 greens in regulation, that doesn't matter anymore.
Right. And yeah, I mean, we've seen Sergio play well there. He's not the best scrambler in the world. Just hit every green and keep it, bomb it out there a decent bit, and you could play well at Augusta.
One of the stories that I read on Golf Digest recently was about, I forget who the player was, because I have a very poor memory for things that happened like not 3 seconds ago, but it was about I believe it was a European Tour player who was like struggling with mental health stuff. And a while ago, and this usually comes up about one guy in particular, Jason Day, about like an injury report in golf. And I've always said that, like, it's impossible to tell. Like, what is an injury report? If Jason Day says, my back hurts, what does that mean? Like, does that mean he's not going to play? Does it mean he is going to play? Like, he's claimed that before and then went out and won that week. So it just seems like information you don't need to know. But, like, remember, I think, was it Chris Kirk or Billy Horschel? I don't want to get this wrong. But, like, they took, like, 6 months off because of, like, alcoholism to get dry. Like, no one knew that. Should we know more about this, especially if gambling is going on? Like, is that a next step? Or is that always just something where this is an individual sport that we're just never going to know?
Yeah, it's tricky because it's not like a team sport. So you're kind of relying on the players to be upfront. And I think a lot of golfers are, dealing with something ongoing. Koepka came out and said his knee's never going to be 100%. Day he would always be questionable, I think, on an injury report. That's interesting. And I think Mike Lorenzo Vera was the guy you're referring to with the mental health. Yeah, I think with betting becoming such a mainstream thing from the PGA Tour, I think it would be smart to do that. I don't see anything stopping the tour from doing that, and it would obviously help from a DFS standpoint.
But here's the thing, though. Like, I don't actually know if it would help or not. Is the problem? Like I said, like, what is an injury report when it pertains to golf? Like, remember, like, when Brian Westbrook was on my fantasy team like 12 years ago, he was questionable every single week. He always ended up playing. So if you're Jason Day and you do say, I have a bad back, like, what does that actually tell me?
Yeah. With Jason Day specifically, I don't think it tells you anything. Yeah.
So I just don't know if it's important enough. Like, it would be important if we had 100% accuracy on this stuff, whether a guy was going to play or if he was legitimately injured. But Brooks can say his knee hurts. So he can go into the Augusta and say that his knee hurts. That doesn't mean that I wouldn't like want to pick him to win. You know what I mean?
Right. Yeah, maybe just a little heads up when a guy's going to withdraw, so then he doesn't mess up your 6 for 6 lineup. I think that would be a good first step.
Yeah, I that would be the most important part, and that's probably the only part where it actually matters.
Hmm. Yeah,
Right.
totally.
Do you have any questions for me? I told you to prepare something if you wanted to talk about it. If I've left anything off, I think I hit on everything that I wanted to.
Yeah, I don't think so. No, I mean, you're part of our Golf Digest column, so I wonder, where you see that going. If you think it's successful, and maybe some advice. We're new to the golf podcast world. I've been listening to your show for 5 years now, so I wonder, what learnings you could share with a fellow podcaster.
I think it's more of a social thing because I get tagged in the stuff on like Instagram and I see it and it says like, hey, to see the full article, go to the thing and swipe up. But no one actually does that. So the commentary that gets left around the gambling column it's like, oh, all these guys do is pick losers, which is true because that's how
Not
golf.
entirely.
No, not entirely. And that's how golf gambling works, obviously. But like there needs to be some sort of like filling in there to like teach those people who don't know what the hell's going on. It's really hard to articulate for me in this sense. Like, do you know what I'm saying though? Like when you look at those comments below it,
I've looked at the comments, and you can't get too focused on them. Obviously, you've been in the space for so long, but no, I mean, people don't click the articles, so they don't see that we picked the first 7 out of 10 tournaments right this season. They just see, oh, Pat Mayo picked another guy who missed the cut. What the hell is wrong with Golf Digest doing that? You're right, putting a record onto that. And you're referring to the Instagram post that we put up, referring people back to the main article. Maybe if you put on that picture, hey, we're 7 out of 16 so far this year, that would help.
Yeah, I think the bigger thing is the thing that people don't understand, and maybe this goes back to the education part that we talked about. And if you're like trolling for Instagram comments, then your Instagram is actually the better of the social medias as it pertains to like people not being the, like biggest pieces of shit in the world. It's actually like kind of positive from time to time, which is nice. But like if I picked Bryson for WGC Mexico. So did I think that he had the best chance of winning? No, but I liked his odds the best. So Bryson 28-1. It's that part that I think that gets lost on people is why is this my one pick when I could just pick Rory every time? You know what I mean?
Right. Yeah, you're talking about value specific to those odds. And
like, I'm talking about what I think the best bet is versus over who I just think objectively is going to win.
Right. And I think you're right. That speaks to, Golf Digest doing a better job of educating, the normal golfer, the normal consumer of our content. So I hope that's where we get to in the next couple of years. And, with people's help of, helping us drive the conversation. And you could see it too, where we've gone from 3 or 4 years ago, how this was kind of like something you didn't want to talk about on the mainstream. And, you've done a great job with your show. And I hope that, Golf Digest could say the same thing 3 or 4 years down the road, that we've, made leaps and bounds in this space.
All right. Stephen Hennessey, tell everyone where they can follow you on the social medias and tell us what maybe something we don't know that's coming out of Golf Digest soon.
Let's see. So my handle is S_Hennessey GD.
Yeah, you might want to change that, man.
I know who has an underscore in 2020. It's terrible, but I'm an editor. I'm a content guy. I'm not necessarily a social guy. Let's see. Coming down the road from Golf Digest, I mean, a lot of interesting things. We have a new instruction app coming out with Golf Digest schools, so that'll be cool. Just continue to follow our betting content, especially because that's your audience. So I would love if people gave us feedback, things that we're doing that they might see how we could improve upon, because we want to be kind of the voice of the people, just like you've been. So but I guess that's kind of it.
Bit of advice on this one: when you ask for feedback from the people, it's always negative.
Yeah, that's true. Be careful what you wish for, right?
Yeah, you'll get a ton of it, and you'll be like, "Oh God, I did not need to see this." Anyway, thanks so much for the time, and thank you for being on. For me, you can follow me at the PME, Twitter, Instagram, the Facebooks, and you can always subscribe to the Pat Mayo Experience. If you do, subscribe, and leave a 5-star review. DraftKings handle something you enjoy about this show, you'll be in a draw for 100 DraftKings dollars. I suggest you do that. I don't remember what the giveaway was for the video, but I said it at the beginning of the show, so go do that. I'm Pat Mayo. Thank you all for watching. I'll see you next time.
That Mayo experience! Experience!